Welcome back to the GBGuns Armory, where we go through tripped on my tongue there. Go through firearms we've reviewed in the past on the main channel, just to give some follow-up thoughts on, extra thoughts, as well as stir up any discussion points that come from the firearm itself. Today's is the Tara TM-9X from the beautiful little country of Montenegro. Been there a few times. Granted, it's been a couple decades, but gorgeous mountainous area. The Tara River is beautiful, and that's what these are named after. They're made by Tara Aerospace, who, though I know most people, and it's okay to admit if you can't find Montenegro on a map, don't think of Montenegro as a major producer. Tara Aerospace makes things like flares and ejection seats for fighter planes and all kinds of like legitimate NATO grade stuff. In fact, they'd make it for NATO. So them getting into a handgun kind of makes sense. Rumor or lore on the internet is that a lot of the folks that started working here used to work at Glock, and that's where some design ideas came from. However, this is not a Glock clone. It is Glock 17 sized, but the trigger has kind of a unique feature. It is a long continuous double action break all the way at the end, but watch this, the reset right there. Or you can release and then you've got the long pull all the way through the end. So it effectively is safe like a double action, single action. However, you can run the trigger any way which way you want without any switches or buttons or external safeties or anything like that to get in the way. I'm aware of and have seen the Forgotten Weapons video on this gun, and you can probably guess why Tara got into some trouble originally. The TM9, and he berates it, shreds it, calls it absolute hot garbage. I have to say, after buying that TM9, I kind of tend to agree. The TM9 itself, the original, was pretty rough as a first go. The TM-9X, however, is the one that we have reviewed. You've never seen the TM9 on the channel because I bought it, excited about this thing, loved it. I like lineage in firearms. I like, as you can tell, maybe collecting progressions and changes. And handling it, it was so rough I just didn't really want to mess with it. Plus, knowing that it's a dead gun model and only a small amount of them are in the country in the first place, it really didn't do me a whole lot of good to get anyone excited about it if I had liked it. With the TM-9X, we enjoyed it so much that Tia got one of her own as well, so we have two of these things. It's just a very pleasant and nice shooter. The finish on the barrel is absolutely superb. The finish on the slide is excellent. You've got ambidextrous magazine release, which is your only external control, aside from slide release, of course, only being on the left side. And as I strip this thing, you can see that we've got really nice internals and quite a bit more rail than you get on most of your standard modern guns. If you guys want to see this thing up close, of course, the tabletop video still exists on the main channel. We've got a nesting recoil assembly. Like there's some nice touches in these, and I believe they're still available. There is a US importer, and they were starting a US brand a year or two ago. I don't know what's come of that since then, but these things are still around. They fit Glock holsters and offer, I think, better ergonomics and better trigger than a Glock. Granted, if you are not familiar with double actions, it might be a bit bewildering, but this isn't double action per se. Let me show you again. I mean, this is all weighted. That's the slack, and then it's weighted all the way to the back and kind of slips through for an undefined wall, but the break is at the very end. And what that's good for is what's becoming a more popular technique of just stroking through the pull versus staging the trigger. I learned to stage triggers, and that's something that I'm trying to break myself from. I've heard the arguments for just pulling through, especially when it comes to defensive stuff. My thought had always been, as a trigger stager, that because I have so many thousands of rounds through staging a trigger, that in a stressful moment I'm probably going to do the same thing. Hard to tell. The last time I was in a gunfight, I didn't know anything about guns, and that was Afghanistan. So, but this thing, I mean, I think the problem for most obscure guns is not being on the shelves of a gun store. I think if it's not at the counter, it doesn't get seen by most people, and so the only folks who do find out are enthusiasts or collectors. Now sure, there's still plenty of those out there, but it's a smaller group than people who are just looking to buy a gun and don't know the difference between brand 1 and brand 2. The magazines are gorgeous. We got witness windows for each individual round, which is how I like them to be. The texture on it is great. You've got interchangeable back straps. It's a good gun, and although it had to enter a crowded market, I think we're seeing a return of interest in fuller sized guns like this. I don't know why. Maybe that's just the media steering that way because everyone's tired of doing micro compacts. Especially those of us that got tired of doing single stack 9s when those were cool. But it feels like, I mean, I like to think that shooters are recognizing that the bigger the gun is, the easier it is to shoot, and the easier it is to shoot well. You get a longer sight radius. That might be something that hurts this, is it is not optics ready. But not everyone needs optics. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to say about these because other than my own experience with them, there's not a whole lot of information about them out there. But I do feel it's important that you guys understand there's a difference between the modern TM-9X and the original TM-9. In fact, let me pull that one out. When I was researching for the TM-9X, all I could find online were European reports on this, the TM-9, the original. And you can see that the finger grooves and the traction, the whole design is a little bit different. In fact, the gun feels lighter. Racks much more easily, probably because the recoil system is different. The trigger is roughly the same, but not as smooth. In fact, even mine, I didn't do it that time. Yeah, it's a much heavier trigger. I would get tired with this trigger. There we go. That time, of course, again off camera. Doesn't rack smoothly. Who knows how these ended up in the country. This one was imported by Century Arms, but might have just been a small lot. And they are marked Crna Gora, which is Serbian for Montenegro, versus the TM-9X is marked Made in Montenegro for English speakers. So don't confuse this gun with the current one. This one, only if you're really curious, would I recommend. The TM-9X, however, was a really, really nice shooter. Tia doesn't buy a lot of guns for obvious reasons, but she really wanted a TM-9X after that review, so that should speak something to it. I will link the original full reviews of the TM-9X in this video. Curious if you guys have ever seen one or known anyone else to have one. I know I have kind of an obscure collection, but that's kind of what I enjoy doing. So that's episode 11 of the GBGuns Armory. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.